Rustic spots like this help me to imagine the way things used to be. And maybe because I'm beer obsessed, they make me think about farmhouse ales. I used to think farmhouse was just another word for Saison, but turns out it's actually a whole category of beer styles. In other words, a Saison is a farmhouse, but a farmhouse isn't necessarily a Saison. The farmhouse family includes Saison, Biere de Garde, Gueuze, Sati, and a few other styles. I've made a bunch of different Saisons, but today I'm taking on my first Biere de Garde. Originally from northern France, Biere de Garde translates to beer for keeping, and that makes a lot of sense. Historically, French farmers would brew this beer soon after the fall harvest and store the beer until spring. Biere de Garde examples range significantly in color and alcohol, and can be quite expressive in terms of flavor. They're typically made with ale yeast and Brettanomyces and may include candy sugar, spices, and other things like that to add additional flavor. I rounded up some coriander to make things interesting, and I'm ready to give it a shot. Now, let's make some beer. While my strike water heats up, I'm adjusting the water profile for this beer using gypsum, calcium chloride, and a little lactic acid. While this step isn't necessarily required to make good beer, it absolutely helps, especially if you want to make something great. And for this beer, I'm trying to emphasize the malt characteristics, so I'm going a little heavier on the gypsum and dialing back the calcium chloride. Speaking of malt, for this beer, I'm using 53% Pilsner, 20% Munich, 20% white wheat, and 7% Cara Munich. The mash is going down in 2 steps, 30 minutes at 144 and 30 minutes at 152. With the first step at 144, I've got my Anvil Foundry brew system set to 150 for mashing. Let's get this thing going. I'll keep mashing this in until everything is nice and saturated, and I'll start a timer for 30 minutes. Alright, that's 30 minutes, and we're moving up to 152 for the second half of the mash. Now that we're up to temp, I want to recirculate the wort and try to clear this thing up. 30 minutes to go. While the mash finishes up, there's a beer I've been meaning to move into a keg. Let's head inside and check it out. It's been about 2 months since we brewed this Saison, and it's time to get it into a keg. This one started with bottle dregs from one of my favorite Saison examples, and I also included some experimental yeast that's supposed to enhance hop aromas. The first thing I need to do is flush the keg with CO2 to remove some of the oxygen that could ruin the beer. Now, I can send the beer from the carboy to the keg. The last thing I need to do is pop the top on and flush the headspace with CO2 to try to eliminate any remaining oxygen. I'm gonna throw this thing in the kegerator and I'll meet you back in the garage. Time to yank these grains and get our boil started. No sparks today, so now that the basket is up and out of the wort, I'm cranking this Anvil Foundry to full blast. And while we make our way there, we've got a first wort hop addition to throw in. Here's 21 grams of Saisons. Once we're up to full boil, I'll start a timer for 1 hour. You can see I've got a ton of protein material on the top here. This is often referred to as the hop break, and I've seen some people try to skim this off the top with a spoon or something. While that might work for some people, I find that with a rotating dip tube, you can just let it settle to the bottom during the boil and leave it behind when transferring to the fermenter. Alright, we've got 15 minutes left in the boil and it's time to get the wort chiller in there. This will be my first time using this stainless chiller that comes with the Anvil Foundry, and I'll be honest, I'm a little skeptical that it's going to work as well as my DIY copper chiller. But we'll see. I'm also going to get ready for the next addition by grinding up some coriander. Holy shit, this stuff smells good. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left in the boil, and I'm adding 5 grams of freshly ground coriander seed. That's 5 minutes, and it's time for our hop stand. I cut the heat, and I'm adding 14 grams of Saisons. 30 more minutes. And just like that, we're ready to chill. Once we're cooled down and in the carboy, I'll add the yeast. I'm going with Bell Saison and a fermentation temperature of 65 degrees Fahrenheit. What the Holy Not cool. I knew this wasn't gonna work well. Well, that was hectic. Look, it's a fine chiller, but the tiny little hoses just aren't gonna cut it for me. Way too much pressure builds up, and the dang thing doesn't even come close to hitting the bottom of the foundry. It easily took me twice as long to chill the beer to pitching temp than with my previous chiller. More to come on that. The beer, on the other hand, is looking pretty good, and I'm stoked to see how it turns out. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll see you again soon.